And that was U2 coming from the Joshua Tree circa 1987 for your listening pleasure here.
I remember my sophomore year when that song very first dropped. Who remembers when that song very first came out in 1987? Yeah. You are officially old. Just thought you'd want to know that. My name is Mark. I serve here as one of the ministers at Christ Community Church. So let me say to all of you today, Merry Christmas! It's great to be here with you. You may think that's kind of a weird song to play during Christmas. I mean, it's not an official Christmas carol, but we decided to play that song because it matches the story that we're going to be telling in just a few moments. Stories of some guys who looked at the stars and looked at life because they still hadn't found what they were looking for. And it's not just them. I think people in our culture in general have restless hearts that are looking for something bigger, something deeper in life. Bono in the song said that he's scaled city walls and he's climbed mountains, but he still hasn't found what he's looking for. You might add to that, I've read some books. I got a degree. I held a girl's hand. I had a mortgage, made a baby. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And I think that that's because we have been designed with this universal desire to connect with the transcendent, to understand the meaning of life, to know why we exist, and our hearts are restless until we settle that issue. And many people express that by saying, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Others wonder, is there more to this life than meets the eye? Is there more than the cycle of birth, school, work, and death? What is the meaning and purpose that there is here in this world? And we're not the first ones to ask this question. People have been asking this question for thousands of years. And some of the people who ask this question are the stars of our story, found in Matthew chapter 2. They're referred to as the wise men, a.k.a. the Magi, a.k.a. we three kings of Orientar. When I was a kid, I thought that was the name of the city they were from, Orientar. Now I know that it's a planet in the Star Wars universe. So what's the story on these guys? Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 tells us, starts saying this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where's the one who's been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. Now, those are some power-packed verses, but probably not as power-packed as our culture and our Christmas cards would lead us to believe. How many of you guys still get Christmas cards? Anyone get Christmas cards at your house? Yeah, I love that. I see that. Maybe your Christmas card, one of them looks something like this. It's the picture of the Magi that comes up in our mind every time we think of it. And you'll notice on the Christmas cards, they always have camels, and they oftentimes are wearing crowns, and they've got these flowy silk robes that would make Ralph Lauren proud. But we don't actually know if they were camels. We don't know if they were crowns. We don't know what kind of headgear they wore, and maybe they wore normal clothes like ordinary people. We just don't know. In fact, they always come in threes on the Christmas card, and we think that there were three Magi that came to see Jesus, but we don't know what the number of Magi was who came to see Jesus. The assumption is that there were three Magi because there were three gifts, right? Frankincense, gold, and myrrh. And frankincense was an incense that they would burn to the gods in worship. And gold is a gift that was appropriate to give to a king. And myrrh was a spice used in burials. Symbolically, gifts for a god who was a king that would die. Amazing that that was what was brought to him just when he was a baby. But just because there was three gifts doesn't mean that there had to be three wise men. There could have been two. We know there was more than one because they use a plural word. There could have been 10. There could have been 100. We have no idea. In fact, one commentator that I read this week said that he thinks because they were carrying things that were so valuable, they would have had to have some guards with them. Because it was a long journey, they would have had to carry a lot of food with them. Probably would have had to bring some chefs with them. There could have been dozens or hundreds or maybe up to 1,000 people We just don't know how many people were in that entourage that went that day. What we do know is that the guy who wrote the first line of the hymn that we wrote, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," just was wrong. But it's not quite so snappy to write a hymn that starts off, "We undetermined numbers of scholars from somewhere in the east of an unknown country are." "We Three Kings of Orient Are." Just a little bit more snappy, so I feel for the hymn writer there. But the eyewitnesses do say that they are magi. Magos is the word in the Greek. Can everybody say magos? Magos is the word in the Greek. And it is referring to people who are literally wise men. That's a good saying, a good way of translating that. But to be a wise man doesn't just mean that you got a great ACT score or that you graduated first from the University of Persia. It's actually speaking of people who are much more specific than that. People who are from a particular kind of a job and a particular kind of a faction that's been a tradition for hundreds of years in the Middle East. These people who are known as Magi were the consultants to the king. They were scholars, they were students, they were scientists, they were historians. They were theologians. They were people who accumulated knowledge. And some have called them astronomers over the years. And while they loved the stars, they didn't have astronomy like we have astronomy. Like, for instance, they didn't even know that the earth revolved around the sun or how many planets there were. Some call them astrologers, but astrology is just enhanced superstition. These guys were more than astrologers. These guys were consummate students of the stars. They binged on star watching like we binge on Netflix. They would look at the constellations like we look at Wednesday Addams. But these scholars were always thinking about what is the meaning of the stars? What am I observing that was up there? And they would observe not just the patterns, but they would assign meaning to the stars. And you guys ever gone stargazing before? Any stargazers here in the room? Yeah, stargazing's awesome, but it's not like it used to be. I mean, nowadays, if you're anywhere near a city, light pollution gets in the way and you can't see but a fraction of what they were able to see back then. And most of us prefer, when it's very cold, to be in a place that's heated, and when it's hot, to be in a place that's air conditioned, and we have lights and internet and television that keeps us inside at night instead of being outside at night. So if we stargaze, it's usually just for a short period of time and then back inside. But these guys, hour after hour, night after night, they would watch the patterns. They would see the constellations. They would look for nuances and anomalies. And anytime they would see one, they would take note of that anomaly and assign some kind of a meaning to it according to the teaching of the Magi that they had seen in the past. Now, based on that term Magi, and also the fact that the text says that they came from east of Jerusalem, our best guess is that these wise men were from the nation of Persia. And the place where the Magi were most likely to collect in the nation of Persia is the ancient city of Babylon. They were likely Babylonian scholars who were looking for something, and then they saw a star that they were looking for in just the right place at just the right time. Now, there's a lot of theories out there about what that star actually was. Some say that it was a new star, just a single star that was fixed in the night sky. Some say it was two different stars, one in the west and one in the south, that led them at different times. Some people would say that it wasn't a star, it was actually an angel that looked like a star and kind of moved to where the wise men needed it. Others say it was something like a comet that was shooting through the sky, and it was in a particular constellation, say Pisces or Andromeda, and the meaning with that constellation, the location of the comet, would have given these guys a clue. The truth is, we don't have any historical information to know exactly what that phenomena was, but we do know one thing. God was speaking to the wise men. And that's really the most important thing about our message here today. It's the idea that God speaks. And if you want to reach guys who study the stars, the best language to reach them in is the language of stars. And so God had just the right star show up at just the right time. You know, I think God loves intellectual seekers. I think he loves people who are intellectually honest and sincere in their heart and are willing to do what it takes to be able to find him. And since God speaks every language, he will speak the language of the people that he's trying to reach. And God speaks them all. God speaks Sudanese and Hmong and Arabic. He speaks Spanish. He speaks ESL. He speaks Nepali. Once in a while, he even speaks English. He speaks science. He speaks beauty. He speaks star. He speaks still small voice. Whatever it is that it takes to reach somebody, God speaks that language because he's so desperate to be able to connect with people who have wandered far from him. And so he uses every tool that's out there. Now, if you're thinking about the wise men, one of the questions that you would ask is, okay, I can see how the star would tell them something, but why would it tell them that the king of the Jews had been born? You know, what's up with that? Where would they have known that from? And I think this is where the story gets a little bit more cool. Because if you go back 500 or 600 years in the history of Israel, before the point that the star appeared, there was a confluence of cultures between Jewish culture and Babylonian culture. If you take a look at the map right here, you can see in the Middle East, this is where Israel is, this is where Jerusalem is, and then over here, this is where Babylon is. This is the route they would have had to travel to get back and forth. And about 600 years earlier, Babylon was the dominant force empire in the world. And they had taken over everything in this arena, and ultimately they took over the southern nation of Israel, Judah, the southern nation of the two kingdoms, and then they exported everybody back in a period called the exile. The people were exiled from Israel to Babylon for 70 years. Now, some of the best and the brightest, 4 young men in particular, were brought into Babylon in order to be raised up through the power structures of Babylon. And one of those 4 in particular was raised up, lasted through 4 kings, 2 empires, and became a consultant to the king. You guys know what his name was? It was Daniel. Yeah, those of you who are here for our fall series where we taught through the book of Daniel from the Old Testament, remember this story well. And so Daniel is raised up to a position of influence. What was his job description? Well, it's probably described best in Daniel chapter 5, verse 11. And in this particular moment, one king had left the throne, his son had taken over, and the wife of the first king, who's now the queen mother, explains to her son exactly who Daniel is. This is Daniel chapter 5, verse 11. It says this: "There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners." Look at that phrase right there in the middle. He was the chief of the magicians. What word does magician remind you of? Magi, yeah, magos. There's similar root words that are behind it. Daniel was the chief magi of Babylon through 4 different kings. So when Daniel writes his book that we now have called the Book of Daniel, Jewish kids would grow up saying, hey, Daniel's our man. He's on Team Israel. We're going to study his stuff. But Babylonian magi would say, hey, Daniel, he's our man. He's a Babylonian chief magi, so we're going to study his stuff as well. And you might remember, if you were here this last fall, that Daniel made a prophecy in that book of when the king of the Jews, the anointed one, the Son of Man, was about to show up. And essentially he said, 483 years after the people of Israel go back from Babylon to Israel to rebuild everything, count 483 years, and that's the year that the Messiah would show up. So Babylonian wise men who are good at math could go, okay, 483 years, count it up. That brings us to about now that the king of the Jews is supposed to be born. And I can't help but, if these guys who were looking to the skies every night anyway, were saying, if this is true, there should be a sign. And they looked in the skies, and God spoke just the right sign to them to make them say, you should go. You should go and check this out. This is a once every 500-year experience, a once in world history experience that you've just got to go and see. These guys were motivated. You know, they traveled 800 miles on foot to go and see Jesus. They literally could have sung the song, and I will walk 800 miles, and I will walk. When they got there, they saw King Herod. Now, this journey would have taken something like 40 days, right? 40 days to get there, 40 days to get back, and then a number of days besides that when they were in Jerusalem. They had to pack and be gone for a long time, which makes me ask the very obvious question, what did they tell their wives? Hey, honey, saw this star, read this prophecy. The King of the Jews is going to be born. I'm going to go see him. I'll be back in 90 days. Can you take care of the 4 kids while I'm gone? I'm sure she was open to it. You know, oh, just pack a lunch, Harold. We'll see you in 3 months. Well, these guys went to Jerusalem, and when they got there, they asked around, where's the one who's been born king of the Jews? Eventually, they got filtered to the guy in charge, Herod, and in Matthew 2, and at this point, they begin asking him, hey, where is the one who was born king of the Jews? Now, if you know Herod was a short man, about 4 feet tall, with a big ego. He loved building big things. He was incredibly insecure, and he was always killing people around him because he was afraid they were getting ready to take over his throne. And so this entourage of Magi come from another nation, these guys whose job it was to be kingmakers, and they come to Herod and they say, where's the one who's born king of the Jews? And he's like, I thought I was the king of the Jews. Herod doesn't know that this happened at all. You see, the Magi knew the time, but not the place. Herod knew nothing, but he knew some Bible scholars, so he called them in and said, where's the Messiah supposed to be born? They knew right away. They're like, well, Micah 5:2 says he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem, duh. You know, Bethlehem, the house of bread, where the bread of life needs to be born. It's the city where David was born. So if there's going to be a new King David, the new King David will be born in that same city. Bethlehem's the obvious location. And so Herod goes back and tells the wise men, Bethlehem is where he's born, and they take off to go to Bethlehem. And then in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, it describes what happens when they get there. It says, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. They bowed down and worshiped him. Now, first detail, you need to know that when they went, they got to the house. You notice it doesn't say that they went to the cave where Jesus would have been born, or they saw him in the manger. In fact, it took months for them to get, or at least a month for them to get there. So he wouldn't have still been in the manger at that time, even though he was still in Bethlehem. And they probably had to take some time to pack, prepare, get all of the stuff ready. And then there's the factor that Herod, after the wise men left, killed every kid under 2 years old in Bethlehem. And we put that together and realized that the wise men weren't at the manger with the infant Jesus. They were probably there months later, maybe even a year later, when they saw the toddler Jesus. Which I know some of you are like, oh, that totally wrecks my nativity set, dude. I mean, do I have to throw them away now? No, don't throw them away. The symbolism's still awesome for that. But the Magi came a little bit later, and you know what happened when they got there? It says they bowed down and worshiped him. These scholars, these theologians got on their knees in front of a toddler and worshiped him. Because no longer could they say, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Now they're saying, I found exactly what I'm looking for. I found exactly what everybody's looking for. The King of the universe, not just the King of the Jews, not just the King of kings, the King of the universe has been born. The Ancient of Days child, the Son of Man, the one who's come to save humanity has been born right here, right now. And so they bow down and worship him. He was the ultimate communication of God. Better than a book, better than a dream, better than a movie, better than a prophecy would be God showing up as a human being to talk to human beings. In fact, John, who is another one of the eyewitnesses that was around during the time, when he was giving his introduction to Jesus, he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us." What he's saying is that the very package of communication with God was crammed into the form of an infant in order to be able to speak to us, to teach us what God's like, to help us connect with his kingdom and his way of living, to live our life, to feel our pain, to get betrayed, to take the nails, to rise from the dead, so that you and I might experience life. And these guys knew, because of what they knew from Daniel, because of what they knew from the stars, they knew that this king was worthy of worship. And this is the message of Christmas, that God came to speak to us. I'm telling you guys, God loves you so much that he loves to speak to you. If you're curious, if you're intellectual, if you're willing to do the work, God is motivated. I mean, the wise men went 800 miles from heaven to earth. God crossed the galaxies. 800 miles from Babylon to Jerusalem. God crossed the galaxies to go from heaven to earth in order to reach you and me. I know that even if you're on a journey that takes a long time, God's patient. He wants to talk to you. For me, it took me 3 years to study Bible and history and science and world religions to try and come to some kind of conclusion. And I found that God was gracious and he spoke to me even in the middle of my confusion. I know that God's speaking all the time. And with the balance of my time today, I just want to ask, how has he been speaking to you this year? And how would you like to hear from him next year? I mean, maybe you're somebody who speaks science, and you take a look at a little strand of DNA and the incredibly intense language that's there, or you look up at the grandeur of the cosmic array, and you say, there must have been a God that was intelligent and designed that all. Or maybe your language is the language of beauty. You look at a spider web, and you go, that is an amazing, amazing, beautiful design. Or the sweep of a sunset. You think the artistry of a God who would paint a fresh sunset every night for the entire planet. Or maybe the language that you've heard God in this year is the language of pain. God speaks to us loudly in our pain, because a lot of times when we're not in pain, we just march through the world looking down at our work, looking down at our phone, looking around at the people who are close to us. But there's something about pain that forces us to look up. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a sleeping world. Maybe God's spoken to you this year through someone who loves you, someone who's reached out to you, somebody who's gone the extra mile for you. Maybe there's somebody who's sitting next to you right now, and you're feeling God's love through them. Maybe you're looking forward to next year and saying, you know what, I got to break out of this depression that I'm in. I need hope next year. I got to break out of this cycle of anxiety I'm in. I need peace next year. And the good news is that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He has great peace for us. Guys, I don't know what you're looking for. I don't know if you've found it yet. But what I do know is that God is speaking all the time. And when God speaks, amazing things happen. When God speaks, galaxies are formed. When God speaks, lives are changed. When God speaks, hope and life and peace break through.
Thank you again for engaging with us this Christmas. One of our hopes is that this impacted you. We'd love to hear how God is working in your life. If you have a story to share, tap the connect button at cccomaha.info. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. We'll see you again soon.